We have for Tony, yourself, myself, and Geraldo.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I
Late at
miscounted
night,
too.
I
Yeah,
can't account.
that is okay.
All right, we are live.
Excellent. Welcome to the Board of Ethics meeting for the City of Norwalk. I am Michael Church, the chairman. Tonight we have Tony Lopez, Geraldo Williams, Cara Murphy, and Assistant Corporation Counsel Brian Candela. First, we are going to go over the minutes from February's meeting. I will presume that we've had a chance to previously review this. Geraldo or Cara, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved, Cara Murphy.
A second. I was going through this at the same time.
Yeah, we'll give it another minute. That's fine. All right. Geraldo second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And one abstention, Tony Lopez, as he was not on the board at that time.
Thank you.
And that's a perfect segue into welcoming Mr. Lopez to our board. We appreciate you joining us. Look forward to getting to know you through this process and having fresh eyes and a fresh mind looking at this. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Welcome, Tony.
Yes, as we go through the process, Tony, feel free to interject. Geraldo, Cara, and myself have all served on this board for several years now. We've spent the last couple reviewing the Code of Ethics and updating it, as you got a brief snippet of at the Ordinance Committee last week. It's been about a 2-year process, a lot of time and hours. And we've been very blessed to have Cara, who's an attorney on our side, Geraldo, who worked in corporate America as well, bringing a lot of different ideas and analytics. And of course, our fearless leader and assistant corporation counsel, Candela, keeping us following proper protocols and such. But with that being said, fresh eyes is always a good thing. And as we go through this process, we'll educate you and update you on what the standards are. If you haven't already done so, I'd highly recommend you read through the Citizen's Guide first, because you'll be a citizen and you'll get a fresh look at it and see where there might be deficiencies or confusions. And then get to read through the whole code so you can start to familiarize yourself with that. And then again, as you have questions and want clarifications, we are happy to provide it. One of the things that you heard a little bit in the Ordinance Committee is we purposely leave things somewhat ambiguous. We like to have discretion, if you will. There's a lot of nuance when it comes to this. And what we found is when you try to be detailed and specific, you can't cover every circumstance that might come up. So we found that we trust the folks that are on the board, that if they have discretion and they understand the intent behind it, that they are better able to act than if we have specific examples and then might not cover a specific scenario, leaving a void in the code. So that's just a quick background and thought process behind how we've been moving forward. Geraldo or Cara, do you want to add anything that I might not have pointed out briefly?
No, but I did want to let you know that if you look at the participants, Lori Toronto is, I think, might be locked out of the meeting. She may be listed as an attendee. So,
Yep, I see her raising her hand. Thank you for
Yeah.
pointing that out.
Yes,
Um,
I can bring her over and
Yep,
I can make her,
please do.
I can promote her to a panelist if that's what you like.
Yes, she deserves a promotion.
Thank you, Larry.
thank you.
She is
Thank you.
promoted.
Hey, welcome, Lori. You're on mute, but feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I
Hi, Lori.
apologize because I just kind of assumed that that the link would be in Brian's last email to us. And so then when I looked for it, I was like, oh, you had to go to the city website. And so this is the fastest way that I could figure out to get in. So
Nope.
thanks for finding me, Cara.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. So let's add Lori to the meeting at whatever time we are right now, 8:09.
And welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Laurie. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Excellent. So aside from notifying us that Lori is here, is there anything else, Geraldo, Lori, or Cara, that you'd like to add to our brief snippet for the purpose of Tony, or shall we move on to the code?
No,
I'm good with what you covered. I think Tony,
Excellent.
recommend reading the code also, just to get familiar with it.
Excellent. Then tonight, I believe we're going into, before we jump into the citizen guide, Brian,
Yes,
do you want to recap how the ordinance committee went for those that weren't in attendance?
sure.
And so let's start with that, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So thank you to all who were able to attend the last ordinance committee meeting. I know that it was a little bit of a wait, but this was 3212 is the largest section that we have in our code of ethics. It has the most sections. It's very complicated and it's very difficult for people who are not familiar with this process to understand. And so it went through a couple of meetings with the ordinance committee, and they approved changes and have sent it to a public hearing. That will be at the next meeting in June, which will be the third Tuesday in June. The ordinance is going to be placed in the paper on June 5th, which is Friday. Not this Friday, but the following Friday, so that it'll be timely in terms of the amount of days prior to the ordinance committee meeting. There was a lot of conversation about a lot of the different sections in 3212. It seems, however, based on the conversations with the ordinance committee, that I anticipate that 3212 will be sent to Common Council at the next meeting, which means that the Common Council will have a chance to make a decision on any changes that they want to make, hopefully by the end of June as it pertains to 3212. We have two sections remaining. We have 32.4 and 32.8 that have not been discussed and sent to a public hearing yet. So I'm going to reach out to Lisa Shanahan, since I don't control what's on the agenda for the ordinance committee. And I'm going to recommend that 32.8 is the smaller of the two sections, the least complicated. So what I'm going to recommend is that at least we put it on the agenda so that it's on the ordinance committee's radar, so that perhaps we can briefly look at it in June and then have a more detailed discussion in July. And hopefully the hope is that this will continue with these last two sections, so that we will have completed the entire code of ethics, hopefully before the end of this year. Because as you all know from looking at the citizens guide, how we change the citizens guide is going to be largely dependent on 32.4 and 32.8, so that we can finally can complete it. So the hope is that we can finish these last two sections. We can finish 32.12, finish 32.4 and 32.8, so that we can finalize the citizens guide, have that updated version approved and then placed on the city website, so that we have an updated code and an updated citizens guide. And then we can turn our focus to potentially trying to set up an educational seminar for officers and employees of the city of Norwalk at a time for this board to consider. So that's kind of where we are. And welcome to Tony.
Thank you again.
Tony getting all the love tonight. Enjoy it, Tony. It doesn't last. But thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. So without further ado, Brian, we can hold off until we know we're on the ordinance committee regarding reviewing one last time 32.8 and 32.4, and we can go into the citizens guide now, or would you like to review 32.8 or 32.4 ahead of time?
So I believe at one of our prior meetings, and it might not have been the last one that we were at, but it might have been the one before. I can't really remember. Where I believe we went through all three sections. We went through 32.4, 32.8, and 32.12, and we made, meaning the board made changes, recommended changes for the ordinance committee to consider. And obviously 32.12 has already gone through that process. So I'm more than happy to go through 32.4 and 32.8 again with you guys. Maybe there's something that stood out to you since that meeting on 32.4 or 32.8. I'm happy to go through it with you, or we can go to the citizens guide and see if there's anything that we can update in the citizens guide, or we can do both. I'll leave it up to you, but I know that we've had conversations about 32.4 and 32.8 in anticipation of meeting with the ordinance committee.
Yeah. So my thought is, I'd like to review the citizens guide. I can re-email everybody, and I'm sure they have it, 32.4 and 32.8. I believe it's actually from October is when we initially did those in depth. I could be incorrect. We might have done it since. But what I think is then offline, not while we're here at the meeting, we can review that and bring any, with Tony's fresh eyes and our fresh eyes, because it's been a few months since we looked at it, see if there's any additional tweaks or questions of why we were doing something, and then bring that to next meeting, as opposed to spend the time now. And for tonight's purposes, we can review the citizens guide and try to be conscious of everybody's time tonight, since we started on the later side.
If you would like, Michael, I can, I'm going to be in the office early tomorrow morning. I can obtain copies of 32.4 and 32.8 only, so that you're only looking at those two sections, and I can email it out to the board so that everyone can see what the most up-to-date version is that we have with all the changes, and then they can make any new recommendations or revisions as they deem necessary.
Excellent. And then go ahead, Geraldo.
Brian, in the package that Brian sent out for this meeting, it has 32.4 and I think 32.8 in there.
I was just going to say that too, but.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
So I didn't know what I could do is I didn't know if this was sufficient, because I know what I emailed you was not in color. The color version's on the city website. It was too large to email. That would have been in a PDF. So I didn't know if it was easier if I just sent it in Word format in color, so that everyone would have access to it in a Word document. So you could make, if someone wanted to make changes, they could make changes and then say, you know, Tony's revisions or Geraldo's revisions to 32.4 and 32.8, and then circulate it around.
All right.
And the changes reflected on the last meeting's minutes that you circulated an email. Those are what? Those are changes. Those are pending. Those are to be discussed, or what? Already voted on.
So we made changes to 32.4, 32.8, and 32.12. Whenever that was, whether it was October or some other date, and those changes were voted on. So the changes that you see in the packet are changes that were made by the Board of Ethics and approved by the Board of Ethics. Those have not, 32.4 and 32.8 have gone to ordinance committee before. They basically started talking about them, and ordinance committee has not made any recommended changes. They've made comments about those sections, but the ordinance committee themselves have not made any. So what you see in front of you in 32.4 and 32.8 was following a conversation by the Board of Ethics and the Board of Ethics's decision on the revisions that they wanted made to 32.4 and 32.8
So these are
for
proposed.
production to ordinance committee.
Okay, so these are proposed or recommendations.
Yes.
And so the suggestion that Michael, you made a moment ago, is to do what with these suggestions? Further refine them, discuss them?
Well, no, so my thought process is I'm good with where we were when we made them. We've voted to approve them and pass them along, in part because you're new, in part because we haven't really, or I'll speak for myself, I haven't reviewed those specific sections probably since February's meeting. And then I know we voted on it, or we initially went over it in October's meeting. So I haven't looked at it in 3 months, is going back with a fresh eye just to see if there was anything that we might have missed. Sometimes it's a small grammatical thing that, you know, you glaze over after you've read it 20 times in a short span. So it was just looking at it with fresh eyes, not with the intent of rewriting it or, you know, changing the scope of it, more just seeing if there is anything that we missed, or for your purposes, if you wanted to understand how we arrived where we did, because you're going to be involved in an investigative panel or a hearing panel in the future. So taking the opportunity to, if you had questions of, hey, how did we arrive here? What was the intent behind that? Is talking through that with you and discussing that with you. So that was my thought process behind recommending that we look at that offline over before the next meeting. What I'd also recommend with the same will be with the citizen guide specifically for you, Tony, is feel free between now and the next meeting to reach out to myself directly and say, I had a question on this. What's the understanding behind this? This way I can also be respectful of everybody else's time. I want to get you up to speed, but I'd rather not use the board meetings themselves all the time to do that, but, you know, just being respectful of everybody's time. So I'd be happy to have you reach out to me directly, and, you know, you can copy Brian on it if you'd like. I wouldn't copy all, just from the standpoint of it can be viewed as a meeting when we're replying all. And so I don't want the correspondences on record as far as a meeting purpose goes. But feel free to reach out directly and we can make sure you understand how we arrived where we did.
Great, sounds good.
Shall we?
Just so you guys are aware, there was it looks like a
Welcome,
couple
Nora.
Oh, hey,
Sorry.
Nora. That's okay.
You-
There was a comment concerning what the Board of Ethics or the Code of Ethics provision is as it pertains to criminal activity. So that might be something that y'all might want to think about prior to the next ordinance committee meeting, because that might be something that pops up during the public hearing concerning 3212. I'm just floating it out there as a potential issue that I don't think was discussed in any detail at the last ordinance committee meeting. But outside of that, I think it was, other than that, I think it was discussed in very great detail.
And just
I'm sorry.
hold on one sec, Tony. Cheryl, if you could just make note that Nora has joined the board meeting. I don't know the exact time, but a little before 8:20. That would be great. And Tony, proceed.
No, I just had a question to Brian. Where in 3212, so I can circle it or make a note, you would have us to revisit or look at or review?
So there's actually no section in 3212 that discusses criminal activity, because 3212 is the procedure for a violation of the code. But one of the ordinance committee members had raised an issue about criminal activity and how it pertains to the Code of Ethics generally, and what the Board of Ethics position is on that. There's not anything in 3212 that specifically details that, but that might be an issue that might be raised at the next meeting. So I just wanted to make you all aware of it, because some of you were present and some of you weren't at the last meeting.
Brian, can I ask you because you've looked at other towns' codes of ethics. So how is that covered elsewhere?
I don't believe that it is, actually. I have not seen personally any that I can recall. Now, I haven't looked at another municipality's code of ethics in well over a year. Once we got down to the nitty gritty of working on ours, I haven't looked at one in a while. I can try to go to some of those specific ethics provisions and then run searches within their code of ethics or ethics code, however they describe it, and see if anything about criminal activity is listed. Quite honestly, I don't remember seeing it, but I can certainly take a look at that issue.
Well, and a stance that
Um,
go ahead, Nora.
No, go ahead.
A stance that we've taken previously that I was taught when I first joined the board a long time ago was that if it has to do with criminal, that's police. We're here for ethics and not criminal, is so that if there is something that is breaking the law or anything that's construed as criminal, is please file a complaint with the police. That doesn't fall under our jurisdiction. If that's something, we'd like to put somewhere as a little caveat, if you will, or, a little asterisk, by the way, we're not a criminal, board. Maybe we can do that. But previously, our response has just been, we're focused on ethics under our code, having nothing to do with criminal.
But I can think of something, Michael, where if it was an employee who had failed to disclose, I mean, it's probably covered elsewhere in the hiring process, but maybe an employee who failed to disclose, or if somebody subsequently gets convicted of something, then maybe that's, cause for termination, their failure to inform the city, maybe, I don't know. So that I'd be interested to see if, Brian, you find something elsewhere looking at other codes, if there's some aspect of, yeah, because I agree with you. I mean, if there's explicit criminal activity, that's not this, but if there's some duty to disclose and they fail to do that, that's a breach of ethics and they might be grounds for termination.
Well, it's a breach of their contract, and that would be directly with their employment contract. We're not in a position on our board to fire anybody specifically.
But it would be supporting the city if they so not everybody is a contract employee that works for the city. So if, it's specifically mentioned in there, then it makes, it gives the ability to the city, I would think, to more easily terminate, somebody if there was something that happened and they, like every year I've got to go back and say, I wasn't arrested, I didn't have a bankruptcy, and if I don't honestly disclose that, I have to sign a code of ethics every year. And if I violated that, they can fire me. So possibly there's a something that needs to be in there just to cover that base. I don't know. I would check with Ray Burney and look at other codes of ethics from other cities and see if that's mentioned elsewhere.
So I've gone through Stanford and now New London's, and neither of them have anything about crime or criminal activity in there.
Okay.
I'm going to go through a couple more while you guys are discussing things. My feeling is that I know that when I signed on to the city, I had to sign some kind of waiver or something like that, indicating that I could be terminated if there was some kind of criminal activity. I believe everyone else probably had to sign something similar. I'll let you know if I find anything about crime or criminal activity in any of the codes of ethics that I'm searching for. Right now, I'm coming up with nothing.
Brian,
Yes.
Brian,
look at Groton and Norwich, because they've been very active with ethics within the past few years.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll do that right now.
Nora, go ahead.
yeah. So, Brian, could you just provide, since I called into the meeting apparently too late, so I missed this conversation, but can you was there any more context for what they were asking about? Because I could imagine a couple different scenarios, but it would be helpful to understand what context this arose in, or what they were thinking might be the gap that might need to be filled.
All right. Let me see if I can give you a better idea. There was a question about whether there's a provision that mandates that criminal activity be reported to the state's attorney's office.
So if someone reported criminal activity to us, whether we had an obligation to report it?
That's what it sounds like, and exploring how criminal conduct would impact ethical behavior in reference to this ordinance. I think the ordinance itself speaks to what is expected of employees and officers. But again, that's something that the committee, that the board can consider. I feel that, in my own opinion, the Board of Ethics and the Code of Ethics is about ethics and isn't about crime or criminal activity. That's
I
not
have-
for me. That's
I
not for
have
me
to
decide.
agree with you, Brian, as I do agree with Michael
Yeah.
in that whether there's an attestation that employees are required to complete or waiver, as you refer to it, typically I would have to believe that there are ways and means at least to hold employees accountable who do not hold up to their part from a legal standpoint anyway. And that to delineate away from the ethics into the criminal aspect might be a more of a bigger reach than we might need to go there.
Yeah.
But
I'll take a look at this issue as it pertains to crime and criminal activity. Right now, it'll be easier for me to do it when we're not having the meeting, so I will report back and let you know if I find anything.
Thank you, Brian.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Brian, I'm gonna send you an email on Groton and Norwich, so you know what you're looking for.
Great, thank you.
Brian, could I ask one favor that you check with the Director of Personnel, Ray Burney, just to, see if currently we're having employees sign that waiver, when they're hired, so that he feels that base is covered, so that if the question does come up in the ordinance committee or elsewhere, that, we can say that it was addressed, so that
What is done criminal activity?
because it's the failure to disclose or the lying about it or concealing it, which would be an ethical breach. Because if somebody filed a complaint and said, oh, there's an employee who works for the city who, was convicted of murder in another state and you don't even know that, and this is a breach of ethics that he lied about it when he got hired, okay, that's covered elsewhere, like he signed a waiver when he got hired, and, it's not an issue for us. So, either, just to make sure that he's got that adequately addressed there, or if he feels like it would be, supporting the HR function if we mentioned it in there, that, should an employee fail to disclose, like he failed to disclose a gift or anything else, it's a breach of ethics.
So I know specifically that we had that there is some kind of protocol in place, but I'll follow up with him specifically. I know that there was somebody who was conditionally hired. There was a person conditionally hired, and then a subsequent investigation found a crime, and that offer was rescinded. But I will follow up with the personnel department.
And I believe also the handbooks would address that same issue too, presumably.
Yeah, presumably.
I think to Lori's point, which I agree with, is if we just get confirmation that this is addressed, then we can say we reached out to the proper channels and they said that, no, this is addressed elsewhere. If they respond that it isn't addressed, then we can take that up at that time. But I think Lori's point is good, just to say that we reached out to the proper channels, and per our discussion in this case with Ray, then we can report back on that. Is that correct, Lori? Yep, I see you. Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and if that's something that is not being addressed or needs to be addressed by the Code of Ethics, then the board will have to take a look at what section specifically that could be located in. 3212 is definitely not the one, but we could take a look and see where it would best fit if it's necessary.
Excellent. We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yep.
Shall we move over to the citizens guide per the agenda? Sounds
Michael,
like
it looks like we lost Geraldo somewhere.
that is accurate. And I don't know that we'll be able to get him back, but we can see. Fortunately, we still have quorum. Let me just send him a quick email.
So while we're waiting for Geraldo, just for anybody who's forgotten, or for Tony because he's new, as it pertains to the Citizens Guide, you'll see where the writing is red, it means that the Board of Ethics has not come to a final decision as to the appropriate language. So you'll see on page 4 of the Citizens Guide under subsection 1, conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest is something that is one of the sections of the Code of Ethics that we have not reached. And so therefore the language has not been finalized in the Citizens Guide because we want that language to mirror or be consistent with the language that we have in the code. The same thing on page 5 with gifts, which I believe is 32.8, 32.4, and 32.8 are the ones we haven't finished. Where the language is black and is not in red line ink, that is language that has been reviewed, and changes were proposed and then voted on and then approved by the board. So that's why only a small portion of it remains in red line, because we only have 32.4 and 32.8 left to be completed.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep. That being said, we might want to take a look at once the board, probably at the next meeting or at the meeting in July, we're going to want to take a look at the Citizens Guide once the once the Ordinance Committee has approved, hopefully 32.12 along with the Common Council. Once those changes are finalized, we can come back and review the process, because there might be some time changes, meaning the amount of days when from when the hearing board or the investigating panel has to be formed. So that would probably be something that we should wait on until the final language has been approved as well.
Agreed on that. Don't need to make extra work for ourselves unnecessarily. I'm just perusing over the Citizens Guide to refresh my mind on this. Outside of Brian, outside of 32.12, 2, 4, and 8, is there? I think we had mostly gotten through the Citizens Guide. I don't have my doctored notes in front of me. I just have what you had emailed to us.
Yeah.
Is there a section where we had left off that we should be reviewing that has already been approved?
So we got through it. My best recollection is that it's been some time since the Ordinance Committee has approved and sent to Common Council a section of the Code of Ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was probably at the end of last summer that the last section was sent, if I recall correctly. Since then, the Board of Ethics has done a lot of work on the sections that the Ordinance Committee had some trouble with or problems with,
mm-hmm.
i.e. 32.4, 8, and 12. And that's why we see red line that hasn't been approved and finalized by the board and the Citizens Guide, because we're waiting for the code to be approved for 32.4, 8, and 12. So as you can see, for example, trying to find one, on page 6 of the Citizens Guide under subsection 5, use of public property, that discusses section 32.6 of the code. And so that discusses that. On the following page, 32.7, use of influence and information. Those were sections that went through relatively quickly with the ordinance committee and the common council. And so the Board of Ethics was able to change the language in the citizens guide to make it correlate with the updated language in the code. And we haven't had much success getting anything else through the ordinance committee and the common council in about 9 months. So this is, by the time, if 3212 goes through at the end of June, it'll probably be about 9 or 10 months since the last thing was put through. That's why we're kind of in a holding pattern on the citizens guide. But the red line version that you can see on the website, the city website, shows you the sections that we're waiting on, which is 32.4 and 8. And we might need to make some additional changes to 32.12 after it's approved, hopefully at the end of June of this year.
Thank you. So my thought process, which I'm very open to hearing others on this board for purposes of efficiencies tonight, is that related to the code of ethics, or the citizens guide, I should say, is we all take a time between now and the next meeting to review it with fresh eyes, since it's probably been 6+ months. Thank Lori for inviting somebody else into the meeting. Very pretty. Next, since we haven't looked at it in the last 3+ months, or I'll speak for myself, is look at it with fresh eyes. Tony will be seeing it for the first time, and focus on the flow of it. Make sure that, again, this is for lay people. This is for, city residents, to guide them. So look at it with those fresh eyes and see if it flows right, if it answers questions easy, or if you get caught up or it gets confusing or it uses legal jargon unnecessarily. So that would be my recommendation, as opposed to taking time during this meeting to read through it. What say others related to that?
I think we're gonna have to look at, on page 11, section 2 on process and the investigation process and the hearing board process. My recollection from the ordinance committee is that they changed some of the timing.
Yep.
And we're gonna have to fix some of the timing once the ordinance committee and the common council approved 3212. Because some of those time deadlines were changed by the ordinance committee.
Yep.
Last week or the week before.
Yeah. So I agree with you, Michael. I think that it makes sense to just hold off and, maybe next meeting take a more comprehensive look. But I agree that I don't know that there's a lot we should be working on tonight.
Thank you, Nora. And good pointing out, Cara. Lori, Tony, your thoughts?
Agree, Michael, completely.
I agree. We need to review it, and at least next month, hash it out.
Excellent. Then is there anything else anybody would like to bring up before we vote to move on from this meeting? Nope. Excellent. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, Cara Murphy.
Lori's first, Cara second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you all for joining us. Thanks, Cheryl. Thank Brian, and as well as the moderator on this. I look forward to seeing you guys in our next meeting and getting us all back to normal. Everybody stay safe and healthy, and